Right, let's have a bit of a chat. I'm currently out driving. I've just finished filming a review and I'm now heading home, and I want to have a little bit of a talk with you guys. This is going to be another long take, another bit of me waffling and ranting, so feel free to listen to this one as a podcast, or put it on in the car on the way to work, or just listen to it in the background while you're, making some tea or doing some tidying or the gardening or whatever. I'm going to chat for a little bit. I want to talk about Aston Martin, a brand that I think holds a special place in the heart of many British people. And let's talk about their recent rebirth, I suppose you could almost call it. I don't like the styling of the new cars, and I think that is a big issue for many people, because an Aston Martin, if absolutely nothing else, has to be beautiful. The new cars simply aren't. But that's not what's prompted this discussion. A couple of things have prompted this discussion. Number one, I found out not too long ago that the DB11 has already been discontinued. Now, before you jump into the comment section, by that I mean that the base V12 engined DB11 is no more. It has been replaced by the mildly updated DB11 AMR, and you can still buy the V8 convertible and the regular DB11 V8 as well. I've seen quite a few DB11s about, but Aston Martin seemed to be quite open about the fact that they just did not sell anywhere near as many of those as they had expected or indeed hoped to. What's more curious and a bit more concerning, you could say, is the fact that since its release, which has now got to be over a year ago, I've only seen 3 V8 Vantages. One of those, 99% sure, was the press car, because it was in that Lime Essence bonkers nuts press spec, and it was very close to the factory. And the other 2 were just on the road, and I caught quick glimpses of them. I still haven't seen one close up in the flesh, but I'm just not keen on the styling of that one either. But let's take the styling and let's put it to one side. Sure, that's going to be a big part of people's purchasing decision, but it's not the only thing about it. Price is at the heart of this discussion. The new V8 Vantage is £122,000 plus options. I've tried to find online a price list for the new V8 Vantage, and I can't. Whether you can actually get one from an Aston dealer or not, I don't know, but I've seen figures quoted for optioned cars anywhere from about £140,000 to about £180,000. Making an assumption that their options are going to be priced similarly to the outgoing Vantage, I would say figures of £140,000 to £150,000 for an optioned car seem quite reasonable. That, I think, is an accurate figure. And that means that you are looking at a car that is a good £30,000 to £40,000 more expensive than a generously specified 911, 992 C2S or even GTS, which is a problem because the new Porsche is very fast. It's very good. Now, I'm not quite sure what was going on the Grand Tour, because they seemed to think that the new Vantage is just as fast around a track as a GT3 RS. Literally every single other person that I've spoken to that has actually driven the cars in question, and I haven't, by the way, like I said, I haven't even really seen a Vantage in the flesh properly. I would love to drive one because maybe they're brilliant, but I don't know. Every person I know that has driven them, and these are all people that know what they're talking about, doesn't really like the Vantage. They all say that it feels like a bit of an old car, a bit woolly and last generation, and in no way, shape or form even a real rival dynamically for, say, a 991, let alone a 992, which I'm sure is going to be a weapon of a car. I'm not really that enthused with the styling of the 992 myself, but 911s dynamically are usually pretty well sorted. Porsche can't really afford to get those wrong. But the Vantage, I mean, what's going on with it? The looks are just a bit too extreme. From the front, it's got these tiny little headlights. It looks like it's constantly squinting. It's doing a thing, and it just doesn't look right. Now, I appreciate the fact that Aston are trying very hard to get away from this sort of old fuddy-duddy image. I know a lot of people that consider an Aston Martin to be an old man's car. I never really held that opinion. I don't think a V8 Vantage is especially an old man's car at all. Wow, there's a man in a van overtaking on an unsighted crest. That's, yeah. Wow, really stupid. Anyway, on with the show. They've started making these cars in all these kind of leery colour schemes, and the interiors of them are just all over the shop. The last versions of the previous cars were actually quite elegant inside. Okay, yes, the infotainment and all that stuff was in desperate need of an update, and I think their tie-up with AMG to provide those things and their powertrains was a very good decision. But they just don't look that great. Now, something happened as well, which you may or may not have noticed. The V8 Vantages all went out for reviews, and most of the reviews, certainly the press, tended to say that the cars all had quite a few problems, often related to fit and finish, things like that. And that's the sort of thing you think an Aston Martin should have absolutely bang on. The fit and finish should be beyond compare. It should be absolutely spot on. Otherwise, what are you bothering buying an Aston Martin for? It's this whole idea of handcrafted English luxury. And evidently the cars that went out weren't that great. Now, Aston Martin in the past have been a little bit shouty and aggressive when things have gone wrong. But this time around, they decided to do things a little bit of a different way, and they went out there and they said, look, what happened was the cars that you were reviewing, they weren't actually final production cars, and that's why you had some problems with them. Two things happened here. Number one, I think that's a poor excuse. V8 Vantage was clearly going to be the single most significant car, in my mind, for the new Aston Martin. It's their volume seller. That's the entry point into Aston Martin ownership. That's going to be the car that most people interact with and most people are familiar with. And to just send them out when you know that the quality's substandard? What are you thinking? It's ridiculous. So they sent out new cars with most of these journalists. So you see people like Matt Farrer and so on. They had 2 goes at reviewing these cars. And in most of these reviews, they mentioned the fact that many of the problems that they complained about first time around were still there. So that hasn't obviously been addressed. There's another more worrying thing that Aston Martin are doing, which I don't always talk about numbers in reviews, because I do appreciate the fact that sometimes numbers don't tell the whole story. In fact, numbers rarely tell the whole story, but they can help you understand what's going on. Aston Martin have taken to quoting dry weights with their cars, which is a practice that I find distasteful, because you don't ever drive a car with no fluids in it. If you did, you won't have driven it for very long. Aston Martin's quoted dry weight and the real weight of the V8 Vantage are about 200 kilos apart. For my friends across the pond, we're talking about a near 450 pound difference. It's a big difference. And I've seen many pieces of marketing from Aston Martin and their dealers proudly claiming that the new car is lighter than the old one. This is categorically not true. If somehow I've got my information wrong, somebody please tell me, but every single thing that I've seen, including EVA magazine, who put these cars on scales, have pointed out the fact that they are very, very heavy. They are seriously big cars. And, well, for a GT car, for something like DB11 or so on, that's fine, that's excusable. But when you combine this very serious weight figure with your 500 horsepower engine, which is, okay, 500 horsepower, it's a lot of power, but also 122,000 pounds is a lot of money. For not much more money, Audi will sell you an R8 with 620 horsepower. Granted, the R8's no flyweight either. Or for slightly less money, Audi will sell you an R8 which is about 570 horsepower. There's a big difference. AMG themselves, the GTR, has about 580 horsepower, something like that. And it's essentially the same engine, isn't it, really? So I don't see why Aston couldn't have given you that engine. Does it make sense? And that price is important. That price is super, super important. I remember, I am old enough to remember when the first V8 Vantage came out. This was a revolutionary car. This was an affordable Aston Martin. I saw those on the roads within months of first seeing them on the TV. And they were very popular. They were everywhere. I then lived in London a few years later, and you pretty much couldn't go out without seeing a V8 Vantage. It's still the case. They're all over the shop. In terms of Aston, they did brilliant business. I don't know how many they actually sold, and it's not that important. The cars were out there. The cars were super popular. Same very much as the first generation R8. I think these two companies capitalized on things. They got there at just about the right time before the crash happened. You know, this whole generation of people that have been serial 911 buyers that have just got a little bit tired. You know, of course, Porsche had some big engine problems and things like that as well. So I think there are a few people that got burned with that. And out come Aston Martin and Audi with these two great and well-priced alternatives to the 911, and people snapped them up. People loved them. You know, R8s, again, R8 V8s, they were everywhere. You remember that? They were all over the shop. New V8 Vantage, though, they're just not around, are they? People just are not buying them. It's gone badly wrong. At the top end of the scale, DBS, I mean, awesome, cool, the best looking of the bunch, I think. And what a thing, you know, massive power numbers, huge torque figures, luxurious car, brilliant. It's £225,000 plus options. I've seen them optioned way beyond £250,000. It's just too much. And here's the fundamental issue. What really is the difference between V8, DB11, DBS? Is it actually big enough? I'm not convinced that it is. I think Aston could and should have used this opportunity, this new generation of engine tech and then the new turbocharged engines, to really start to try and fight on the sort of more value front, to try and give a better alternative. We know, you know, I know, it does not cost Aston any more. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm completely wrong. If I am, I'm sure someone will get in the comment section and tell me about it. But it can't cost Aston any more to have given the V8 Vantage 600 horsepower rather than 500. Maybe they have an agreement with AMG. Maybe they've promised that, look, honestly, for this, yeah, we're not going to charge this amount of money for a car with this power, because that would step on AMG GT's toes. Perhaps they've got that kind of agreement. It wouldn't surprise me in the least. But if they don't, what's stopping you? Because if you were then selling the V8 Vantage at the exact same price, but with 600 horsepower, people would go, ooh, now there's a thing, that's quite cool, that's a lot of power. And people then start to go the numbers thing, and they go, oh, well, yeah, 911's 110 grand with only 450 horsepower, but for 125 grand, you can get your Aston with 600 horsepower. Like, well, that's a lot better, and that'll probably help it push it down the road and much better and all that stuff. But it hasn't worked, has it? I mean, DBS, on the other hand, has got so much power and torque that the few people that I know that have driven one have just said, yes, it's wonderful and lovely and a bit funny, but you can't actually use the power. It's just got so much of it. And I struggle to think why you would buy one at the prices that they're asking over a Ferrari. Now, granted, the Ferrari is going to be a totally different animal. The Ferrari, the 812 Superfast, or even the old F12, is going to be a scalpel compared with the DBS's sledgehammer. And that's kind of okay, except the problem is, if you're happy with a car being less refined and less fast than the equivalent Ferrari, well, there's no point really getting the DBS, is there? You might as well just get DB11. And if you need proof that something's going wrong with these more expensive Astons, have you looked at the price of old Astons lately, particularly the V12 ones? They were strong for a number of years, but they have really, really fallen. I couldn't quite believe it. I thought there was a typo or as a salvage auction or something, but I've seen several Vanquish, not the first gen one, the more recent one, for well under £100,000. Now, I'm sure there are earlier cars with less desirable specs and the old 6-speed automatic gearbox, not the newer, better 8-speed, but still, they were seriously expensive cars. And you're then talking about cars that have lost potentially well over £100,000 in about 3 years. That's a huge, huge sum of money. Like a ridiculous sum of money to have lost. And I'm sure the sort of person that has £200,000 to spend on a car doesn't like the thought of losing 100 grand any more than you or I would. Trust me on that one. These people don't have the kind of, oh, sod it, it's only money attitude that you may think. I'm sure there are a few of them out there, but I don't think there's enough to keep the company afloat. Aston's pricing at the minute also leaves me with a bit of an interesting question. V8 Vantage S is certainly going to happen. I mean, it has to, doesn't it? They've got to make one. It's an obvious thing to do, and it's, to me, the simplest explanation as to why they haven't given the base Vantage as much power as they could have, because they want to charge you for the privilege of having a little bit more go. But V8 Vantage is £122,000, and then the DB11 starts at about 140 so. So there's not really much of a gap there to put your V8 Vantage S, because the DB11 surely should be better than the V8 Vantage, shouldn't it? I mean, they've not always been wedded to that fact. I mean, the V12 Vantage was always a quicker and faster car than the old DB9, just because that's how it was. So maybe I'm kind of thinking about something that's actually not relevant at all. I do it quite a bit. I'm very good at it. That price of old Astons is very important as well, because, let's be honest here, the majority of customers for the new Aston Martins are going to be owners of old Aston Martins. I don't think really that much has changed about the cars that they're suddenly going to start bringing in new customers. I mean, okay, they look totally different and they've got new engines and all that jazz, but fundamentally they're still doing the exact same thing. And because your point of entry is now so much higher, if you imagine that not too long ago, £80,000 would get you into an Aston Martin, and now it's 125 plus for the same car, you might have somebody out there who's got a V8 Vantage or maybe even a V12 Vantage, and that car's maybe worth 70 or 80,000 pounds. Or dealers may be offering them 60 or 70 grand to trade in, and so they're basically being told they've got to double their money to get the new car. Now maybe these would be the sort of people that if it was, I don't know, let's just say an extra 20, 30 grand or so to upgrade to the new car, or if you're doing it on finance, just look, trade in your old car, you know, same monthly payments and all that, and you just have the brand new one. They probably would have done it as a matter of course, as many people do, as Porsche types do. When the new one comes out, well, they trade it and they get the new one. They don't really care whether it's better or not. They don't even ask. They just get the new one. And maybe that would have happened with Aston, except the price increase that Aston is asking is so stupendous that people are stopping and thinking, they're going, hang on a minute, actually I'm not sure I really like the new one that much. Actually I really quite like my old one, and it sounds better and it looks nicer and everything else. Yeah, sod it, you keep your new one. And that's the situation I think that we've got at the minute. You've got all these people that are perfectly happy with our old Astons, and I saw a V8 Vantage only yesterday, an old one. They still look awesome. I know it looks the same as all the other Astons that they're making at the time, but they were really gobsmackingly pretty. And for an Aston, I suppose that is kind of the most important thing. They sound good too, and actually I think they handle pretty well. I mean, it's quite odd. I've seen a lot of criticisms lately of how bad the old Astons were, and I'm like, well, this is news to me. They were great cars. They were really, really good, in fact, and people whinging and whining about build quality and things, and it does seem like there's a new one out now, so quick, we best bash the old one, when actually the old one hasn't gotten worse just because the new one's out there. In fact, in some ways, the old one's even better because they're all mature now, they're all developed. Any problems that these cars are going to have, they're fixed years ago. It's a strange set of affairs, so I'd like your input from this. What is going on with Aston Martin? Do you like the new Astons? I don't care if you're the sort of person that can actually afford one of these cars. If you had that kind of money, would you really buy a new Aston, or would you just get an old one, or what would you go for if you had that kind of money? What do you think the problem is? Do you think there's no problem at all? Do you think they're doing just fine? Has your neighbour bought one of these? Do you own one of these? And you want to come and have a chat with me and show me how wrong I am and pimp slap me with your Aston loving hands? Like, I would love to know, because I am genuinely curious. This is not a rant designed to hate on Aston Martin. I appreciate it might sound that way, but I'm just a bit confused as to what they're doing, because as a Brit, I would love to see them do really well. But historically, I've always said, you know what, yeah, if I had the money, I'd love a Vantage. Yeah, I'd love a Vantage as a posh daily. And now I'm just sitting there going, why would anyone bother with a Vantage? And that's kind of sad. Anyway, thanks as always for listening to my elongated warblings. I'll catch you all for the next one. See you soon. Bye-bye.